that in hard copy with the rubric on top, because they'll be going through, writing out their comments on it and giving you feedback. Again, it's a twofold purpose. The first purpose is to give you exposure to technical writing very, very early in your curriculum, as we'll talk about the importance of technical writing. The second purpose is to get you started on each one of those phases at least 1 week prior to actually the code actually being due. As many of you probably have experienced, if you wait to the last minute, your work is not very good. You're rushed, you're under pressure, and it suffers from a design perspective and from a grade perspective. And we'll actually be doing a reverse outline that illustrates exactly that. I took several samples of solutions for the suffix array that were very rushed, very disorganized, and we're going to be taking a look at those. So, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Is this on?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. How are you doing? Great. Yay. Okay. So my name is Vishnya, and this is Meredith, and we work at the UNL's Writing Center, and we're going to we stopped by today to talk to you guys about writing and coding. And while we were preparing this lecture with Dr. Burke, we started thinking about the relationship between writing and coding, and the exercise that we designed for today are actually going to be similar to the things that we do at the Writing Center. So I'm going to talk about the Writing Center during the last 5 minutes of our lecture, but basically the point of these exercises is to get you guys to collaborate and work with one another. So there are going to be a couple of exercises where we're going to ask you to talk to a person sitting next to you. So if you if you don't know your classmates, this might be a really cool chance to get to know one another. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So.
Cool. Okay. So I first wanted to start by talking about the importance of writing. And you might think it's really easy for me to do that because I'm from the Writing Center and a lot of professors believe in the importance of writing. But I also wanted to talk about another stakeholder, which is employers. So after you graduate, or maybe you're looking for a summer internship, how do employers feel about writing? And this is survey data that I'm going to put up here. And it was a survey, and you can see it's from 2018, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, so really recent data. And there was a survey given out to all employers, and they had to look at these competencies or skills and say which ones are essential. So just take a look at those skills for a sec and think in your head, which ones do you think they most valued? And I'll show you in a sec. Okay, I'm going to show you the top 4. So the top 4 were teamwork, critical thinking, professional work ethic, and oral and written communication. So this is something that employers are super, super looking for, so it's worth developing now. And not only are employers looking for it, but when they did the second part of the survey, which then says, once those employees get there, once we hire people, how proficient are they at these essential skills? Writing was actually super low. So only, 41%, 42% of folks who came in were rated as being efficient writers. So one of the goals of today's presentations is to get you writing now, because the only way you get better at writing is through practice. And I think the other hope we have today is to show you how it's actually related to your coding and how you can use tricks from the Writing Center to actually make yourselves better at coding so that you can kind of be really, really proficient at one of these essential skills that employers are looking for.
I would add that included in this survey, or tangential to it, is I've been involved with industry advising panels that come in and tell us what's good about our curriculum, what needs to be improved, student advisory panels, alumni associations, that all we ask for feedback on what can we improve, what do students graduating, what are they deficient in, and it's always technical writing. It's always that's always mentioned as one of the top 3 things. That students need to be better writers.
Cool. Okay. So our presentation is going to run about 50 minutes. And we're going to divide it kind of into 3 parts. We're going to start by talking about the parallels between the writing process and the coding process. Then we're going to move to reverse outlines and how you can actually use this technique called reverse outlining to look at your code and revise your code. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some of the super important characteristics for a design document, that thing that you're going to be writing at the end of the semester, and look at some samples to think about how it is you can actually make that document really clear and concise for your readers. And you'll notice there's this talk is kind of framed by 3 techniques. So free writing, reverse outlining, and analyzing samples. And our hope is that those 3 skills you can then use in your other classes and use in other points. And while we're doing this, you all are going to be participating. We're going to be asking you to write. We're going to be asking you to talk. I'm going to come around with the microphone. So be prepared. Be ready. Okay.
Okay, so first we're going to start off with the free writing exercise, and I think you guys, one of the readings assigned for today was the text that we wanted you guys to read, and that talked about the similarities and parallels between coding and writing. So what we want you guys to do is basically, when it comes to this specific article, the author talked about similarities and parallels between writing code and writing a novel specifically, and the author also emphasized the importance of drafts. So basically, what we want you guys to do in the next couple of minutes is to do a free writing exercise. So before you start doing that, is everyone familiar with what free writing is? Has anyone ever done it before? No? Not really? Who has done it? Okay. Just a couple of people. Cool. Okay, that's exciting. So free writing means that you just, for 5 minutes, you write. So don't pay attention to grammar, spelling, punctuation, anything of that sort. So just go out there and write for 5 minutes. And we actually have 2 prompts that we want you guys to focus on in your free writing exercise. And they're right on the screen. So the first one says, what are the steps you take to get from an idea to a final draft? And the second one is, how are these steps similar to your coding process? So while you're thinking about these 2 questions, think about the text that you read for today, the one that talks about the parallels between writing a code and writing a novel or any other kind of piece of writing. So just take 5 minutes, focus on these 2 prompts, and think about the text that you read. And we're going to time you, right? So you're going to have 5 minutes, and after that, we will ask you to share what you wrote with a person or a couple of people sitting next to you, and then we're going to have a super brief class discussion on it. So yeah, just go ahead, get a piece of paper or anything else that you're using to write. Maybe not a piece of paper. That's what I do in my literature classes. But yeah, whatever you use for to type things up. So take 5 minutes and focus on these 2 prompts, and then we're going to talk about what you wrote.
Take 30 more seconds. All the words. All right. So turn to a person next to you or anybody around you. It can be in groups of however many you want. And talk about the answers to these. Did you both feel similarly about the relationship between coding and writing? Or no, completely different. You don't agree. You don't see that much of a parallel. All right. I am super curious to hear what you all had to say. I'm just going to come around. If you don't want to speak into the microphone, you don't have to. You can talk to me and I'll just summarize what you said. But I'm just going to start back here. Any interesting ideas come up in your group back here? And again, you don't have to speak into the mic if it freaks you out. I'll summarize. Or what about this group? What do you guys talk about? Yeah. Do you want the mic? Great.
We came up with starting with very broad ideas for all the parts and then kind of going into more detail one by one to all those broader ideas that you have for the essay.
Cool. And so you also start with broad ideas when you code? Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Just because I am not a coder. What do you mean by start with broad ideas?
Kind of just start with the general methods and stuff that you would come up with to solve those issues and then figure out actually how to do it when you get into the more detailed part.
So it sounds like you're thinking of really big ideas first, kind of like making an outline almost, and then kind of filling in those details afterwards. Did the group members feel similarly, or you guys use a different process? Pretty much. Yeah, again, dividing it into parts first. And that seems like working on each part. Cool. All right, what about over here? Anybody? You mostly just said the same thing. It's about, start, again, is it mostly the same thing about dividing it into parts or starting big picture and getting smaller?
I mean, he mostly said that for the most part, it's more about getting the idea down first, and then from there, trying to split everything apart and kind of make sure that each individual part's working in a way that kind of contributes to the idea. So when you go through that process and you're coding, and again, this is me asking genuine questions because I don't really code that much. But when you're coding, do you write the whole thing down first, or you do bits and then add more code? Or do you go from start to finish? I guess, like, for me, the way I do it is I do try to do it so that the whole thing's there first, and then kind of splitting that whole thing into parts and see, like, what's working, what's not, and, like, running a bunch of tests. Like, the way I program is really, like, it requires that you have to go through the code over and over and over, which is...
Do you do that with your writing, too?
A little bit, yeah.
Cool. So I'm hearing splitting it into parts, thinking about broad ideas first, and going over it over and over and over and over and over again. All right, anybody else? Yeah.
So in regards to the first prompt there, how to get from an idea to a final draft, my partner and I had kind of different approaches on how to get there. So for he took a more like concrete and technical approach. You go through a lot of stages such as like research and development for writing, and then you get to how you can start a rough draft, do peer reviews and constant editing and stuff, and you finally work your way down to a final draft, where I think mine, kind of along the same lines, was like a more abstract approach to that. So I said stuff along the lines of, to get to a final draft from an idea, you have to be able to consider like everything that you've written so far and how you can like simplify it, make it readable for like different audiences, and how like everything you build on top of what you already have written is consistent with the stuff that comes before it, so that everything kind of grows together and just works overall.
So I'm also interested, you mentioned in the answer to the first one, you mentioned all these stages like peer review and revision, and then you mentioned audience. Do you all peer review your code at all? No? You don't peer review? It's not always allowed. That's true.
When it's allowed, do you?
Yeah. Do you peer review your code? Kind of. Yeah. Like a lot of people. Does that, the people who nodded yes, how does that help? Does that help at all? Why? Why does it help? It gives another perspective. And does that do you also do that in writing? How many of you get peer review, seek another person to talk about with your writing? And does it have a same sort of effect, like with that other perspective? Like when you're writing, you might not know exactly how a reader is going to respond to that type of writing. So the point here is, like, when we're going to do some exercises today, the exercises today are really useful in moving from that idea to the final draft. And they're exercises to get you, to help you along those steps along the way. And I think that based on what you all have said, writing sounds really, really similar to coding. So I think a lot of these steps are maybe going to be transferable.
Okay, so the first exercise, the first thing, or the second actually, because we already did the free write, is the reverse outline. So reverse outlining is something that I use in my composition classes and literature classes, and also pretty much every time I consult at the Writing Center. And I found it online that someone said that reverse outlining is the Swiss Army knife of revising, which I thought it was kind of cool, and I wanted to share with you guys. So when it comes to reverse outlining, and when we think about outlines in general, we think of them as something that people usually write before they write a paper. So how many of you write your outlines before you start writing a paper? Is that something that you typically do? Perfect. So this is something that people typically do. So basically you write an outline, and then you develop the different points in your outline, and that's pretty much how the majority of the students that I've worked with approach their writing. But when it comes to reverse outlining and reverse outlines, basically, the reverse outline gets its name by being written after the paper it outlines. So that's why it's called reverse. Basically, you have the paper, and then and only after you have the final draft, you work on the outline and you write the reverse outline. So basically, a reverse outline is a very useful technique and a teaching tool. And it is a very useful way of revealing how you organized your ideas, your your thoughts and your argument and pretty much everything that you have written so far in your paper. And they're pretty easy to write. So basically, I actually outlined the 3 most important steps. So step number 1 says you start with a complete draft. So you can only write your reverse outline after you have completed your draft. The second step says summarize each paragraph in 1 sentence. This is typically, so you start with your introduction or introductory paragraph, and then you do the same thing with the rest of the paragraphs in the body sections of your paper, and then you, at the very end, summarize your conclusion paragraph, and that's it. But the most important thing, again, is to summarize each paragraph in 1 single sentence. So what I typically do with my students is that I suggest that they do these things, so to write these summaries either in a completely new document, or if they're using hard copies of their papers, they can just write these things on the margins. That way, while they're looking over their outline, they're going to see the summaries or the comments pretty easy on the margins. And then the very last step says number your list or number your paragraphs. So this is an important step just because it makes the process way easier for you, and it makes it easier for you to say, okay, so paragraph number 5 doesn't really fit into the rest of the paper, or it doesn't really feel that connected to my thesis statement or my main argument, so I need to do something about paragraph 5. So this is why it's important to number these paragraphs. And then I also included a set of questions that I typically share with my students. It says here, use the reverse outline to answer the following questions. And these are some of the questions that after you actually do the reverse outline exercises, it is very important to go over these questions just to make sure that the paragraphs that you have are connected to your thesis statement or your main argument. So as far as the questions, the first one says, does every paragraph relate back to the main idea? So this is very important. So again, if you feel that a paragraph is not really connected to your main idea, or that something is kind of off, you're going to do something about that paragraph. You're going to revise it or include more examples to support your claims or your argument. The second question says, where might a reader have trouble following the order of your ideas? So again, constantly thinking about your readers or your audience is essential. The third question says, do several paragraphs repeat one idea? So if you notice that you have several different paragraphs that kind of are repeating something that you already mentioned, then it's time to work on that and to revise those paragraphs and to maybe delete some of them, right? Next question says, does one paragraph cover several different topics? This can also be a problem. Just because typically what you want to do is to focus on one topic or one idea per paragraph. And finally, the last question says, are the paragraphs too long or too short? So sometimes writing gets out of hand, and sometimes one of your paragraphs is considerably longer or shorter than the rest of your paragraphs, and that's a red flag right there. So that means that you need to do something about that paragraph because it doesn't really fit with the rest of the paragraphs. So what we're going to do next...
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so just to summarize what Vishnya said really fast, a reverse outline is an essay that you've already written. You're looking at those main ideas in each paragraph, one idea per paragraph, and you're numbering the paragraphs, and you're writing a sentence summarizing what the paragraph you've already written says. That's the basic idea of a reverse outline, and that helps with how ideas interrelate to each other throughout your essay. And it sounds to me, based on the discussion we just had about coding involves a lot of broad ideas and how they relate to each other. And a lot of the questions that Vishnya had were like, are paragraphs repetitive? And I feel like in code, efficiency is really important. So reverse outlining a code might be a cool way to figure out how it works. So we're going to start with this example. So this is from your, is it called a suffix array?
Suffix array, yeah.
A suffix array.
This is from your first assignment. And this was basically a good solution right here.
So we're just going to have you, with a partner, number the big ideas and write one sentence for what this code is doing for each big idea. And actually write it down. I think it would be, it'll be more effective. Feel free to work with people around you if you don't really understand kind of what's... Okay, we're going to give you another code to reverse outline in a sec, but I'm going to show you a reverse outline that Dr. Burke actually made of this code, and then just compare it to the one you had and talk about maybe like comparing the one that you wrote down with the one that's up here. I'm seeing some nodding. Not too much nodding, though. How many folks had something kind of similar to this? Ish. Yeah, what were some... Should I do... Yeah, I'll ask. What were some of the things that you used... For someone who is similar, what were some of the things you used to make this reverse outline? How did you know? Yeah.
Well, a big thing is like just the white space. You just kind of naturally group things together. So since there's like two different, there's the making the array list and like filling it in. They're both related to the same thing, so you'd put them together.
Awesome. So you saw some of the way this document is structured gave you clues to where those big ideas were. It sounds like. Cool. Anything else that made this one easy to reverse outline, maybe?
Right there.
Oh, thanks.
Just grouping it by the operations. There are different things that are being done in the program, so you just group each thing as though they're their own paragraph.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see them as paragraphs. All right, we're going to have you do one more.
Before I want to ask,
yeah.
what do we call this thing on the right-hand side? We're calling it an outline right now, but in the terminology of computer science, what is that thing on the right-hand side? Pseudocode, right? Exactly. If you start now, we did this in reverse. How do you design programs? Not in reverse, but in their correct order. You start out with an outline, a piece of pseudocode, and then you produce code out of it. Right? So go ahead.
Okay, we're going to ask you to do one more reverse outline. Go for it, Vishy.
It solves the same problem.
Yep, also the same, suffix array. So I'm seeing a lot of like raised eyebrows and like, ooh, and all of this, but actually try to write something down. And if you can't, if there's one you can't quite figure out, leave it blank. But actually, part of this exercise, interesting, is actually try to write something down for the sections.
And I would point out that the same white space is there, right? It is good white spacing, so it should have some obvious chunks, right? Like the last one. Throw him a line. We didn't bother to do it either.
Oh, okay. So, just take a minute, talk to a person sitting next to you, talk a bit about this code, this specific one, and talk about your experience with this code and the previous one. So, what was something about this code that made it different from the previous one? What were some challenges or some difficulties that you encountered with this specific code? So again, take a minute or two to talk to your classmates, and then we're going to share what you talked about.
Okay, I'm curious to hear about your experiences with these two different codes. Anybody over here, what do you do? What were some challenges about reverse outlining this code? Anybody? Yeah.
there were items defined way at the top of the program which were not used until much later, and that kind of made it a bit more unreasonable.
Don't forget. Kind of like writing a paragraph that way at the top of the section that has nothing to do with anything until you get to the end of the section.
Yeah, so you introduced a topic that then wasn't covered until much later. And that happens in writing all of the time. And so reverse outlining a thing, like what's the coder doing here, introducing stuff, and then you notice that they don't use it until much later. Anything else about this code that makes it challenging?
What about lines 2 and 3? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Doesn't have to be about lines 2 and 3.
Oh, okay. I was going to mention that it is like a very similar structure, like if you just look at the basics of it, but it's added its own like way of sorting. It's overcomplicated, which doesn't, similar to writing, like you can definitely write too much and have jumble on, you know.
Exactly. And if you're Oscar Wilde, that's completely fine. Go ahead and load on metaphor after metaphor. Yeah. But if you're a technical writer, if you're a coder, you're not Oscar Wilde.
Also, with lines 2 and 3, that's another one of those things where it's like an afterthought. You mean the scanner? Where
yeah. Tell me about what's wrong with lines 2 and 3.
It doesn't need to be there.
Right. In fact, it's commented out,
yeah.
Right? So if you're revising and you decide, oh, this sentence in this paragraph, I don't like it, do you just cross it out but leave it there, crossed out? No.
Yeah. It's like the other guy over there mentioned that a bunch of variables are declared at the top. Not only that, they're declared outside of their scope. They're only needed inside loops. There's no need to declare them up there. Just declare them in the limited scope where they're needed. Also, there's a lot of like declaration. For example, the string s equals args. You don't need to do that. Just use args. There's no need to declare a new string to hold that content. It's not going to change once the program is run.
Cool. So these thoughts are really interesting for me, and I just want to move to the next step, which is how did the act of making this reverse outline of looking at these parts and trying to define their function help you identify what the problems with the code? Whereas if you looked at it, you'd be like, I don't know, it's just bad, right? But everyone, when you all responded, you mentioned very specific things, which seem fixable to me in a lot of ways. Does anyone want to share anything about why the act of actually looking at this code and saying, what does this part do? What does this part do? What does this part do? Helps you revise? Like how you wouldn't have been able to do that in another way.
Well, so when you're like going through it the first time and you're just, your first draft, you're just putting your ideas down, you could go through and when you write it, all out, you're like, oh, I'm declaring I, J, and K up here, but they're not even relevant till down there. And instead of just saying, I know I have problems, it's nice to realize that. And then, that you have to sort the suffixes, but then maybe you don't remember, oh, right, Java can do that for me until later. And so, yeah, it's nice that you can just throw your ideas down, then you order them.
Yeah, I like how you described that you didn't know you needed to do that till later. Like, that's such a real thing. When I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, that's my point. I'm at paragraph 5. I'm like, that point should probably be up at the front to ground my essay. But you're never going to, that's so natural to not have an order for things when you start, which is why this revision and drafting thing is really, really important, because you're never going to write good code good essays don't just pop out on the page. They're really, really hard to write. And reverse outlining my writing has really changed me as a writer, and really helped me know how to revise and revise efficiently, because then you know the parts. Anybody else? A last comment back here on, we haven't heard from anyone around here. Any last comments on anything you felt while doing this? You likely to do this? No, not really. Kind of. Sort of. No.
Right here, maybe.
Oh,
again.
sorry, I can't see. Yep.
Sorry, I just want to go off the back of what was said earlier with the strings S args. It made a good point to me about repetition, because in writing all the time, I find, I do it myself for sure, I tend to say the same phrases over again that it doesn't need to be there, and it could be replaced with something much shorter. Right. So if you say pretty cool, you could just say cool.
And just to make yet another connection between writing and coding, they call it revising. If you've got an essay, if you've got a story, you go back, you edit it, you revise it. In coding, in software development, we call that refactoring. If you took that chunk right there that was sorting the suffix array, and you went back and replaced it with, like in the first example, replaced it with a call to collections.sort, you are refactoring. You're not changing what it says. You're not changing what it does. You're just changing how it says it, how it does it, by calling a library function rather than rolling your own function like this. So revising in coding, computer science, software development, refactoring is what we call it.
Cool. Okay, so that first part of the talk was called Writing to Design and Writing to Communicate. So we hope that you try, next time you have to write code, before you hand it in, try reverse outlining. So try this process and see if you can't rewrite a draft of your code. So when we think about writing here, we're using writing, the act of writing that reverse outline, to actually learn how code can be more efficient and less redundant. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about the design document. And the first draft, I believe, due Thursday. Right. And then you have successive drafts, and the last bit is due at the final document due at the end of the semester. So in this case, you're not writing to figure out what you're saying, right? You're actually writing for an audience and writing so that someone else can read your code. And whenever I start a writing project, I always like to know these 3 questions before I start writing, so I know who I'm writing to and what kinds of information I have to conclude. And that's, what are you writing, who is it for, and why is it important? So how many of you know, for the design document, the answers to these 3 questions? You think you kind of have them? So none of you think you could answer these 3 questions? You could give it, but okay. So okay. I'm less interested in the actual answer, and then of where you would find the answers to these 3 questions. For right now, how would you figure out these 3 questions? Yeah, thank you. I'll make the run. It's worth it. The project overview. Where do you find that? It looks like you're on Canvas, though.
Yeah, I'm on Canvas. You can find it, I think, on module 2.
Cool. Okay, so there's a module, and yeah, I have a Canvas shot in a second. Okay, so a really great place to find the answer to these documents is on Canvas, right, where you've got the overview and requirements for your design document. And when I get a syllabus or I get an assignment from a professor and I'm going to write something, I'm always thinking, like, what am I writing? who am I writing for, and why is it important? And a lot of those things are often in the syllabus or are in the prompt for the assignment. And if you go on to, if you click on that, you'll find this phrase. Does anyone want to read it out for me? Up here? Anybody? Just so it's like not my voice the entire time. Nobody wants to read aloud? Really? No one? No one up here? Come on. Thank you.
The design document should be clear and comprehensive enough that a reasonably technically competent person could reproduce your system design, though not necessarily every detail, with identical functionality without access to your actual code base. Our evaluation will be based on how well your design document achieves this principle. In addition, we will also evaluate your technical writing skills by evaluating the following items. Note that this is not an exhaustive list.
Cool. So what follows this paragraph is a description of the qualities of a really strong design document. So you're getting a ton of information here. You're getting who you're writing to, a competent person who could produce your design system. And in that beginning, you're getting, what are you writing? You're writing a design document. Why is it important? You're going to be able to communicate your code to other people who will then be able to use it, right? Okay, so we've got that information. But now there's a kind of tricky thing. So if you read the list that then follows that, there are two qualities of design documents that kind of emerge as really important. One is being clear, so being easy to read, being clear, and being concise, so being short. And one really, but it's hard in your head just to say, like, what actually is clarity? Like, what do you actually do to make writing clear? And kind of the best way, or one way that I like to try and figure that out in my discipline is to take a really exemplary sample or a design document that has these features of clarity and concision and look at it and be like, why actually is this clear? What about what the author is doing here makes this clear and makes it short? So that's just what we're going to do. So yeah, you can flip we're going to look at, and everything I'm showing you is from Canvas, so you can go back and then access what we're doing. So if go ahead, flip it. Okay, so just take a second. Don't stress too much about the individual words or reading it here, but talk with the person next to you, and I'm interested in obviously hearing your answers about what about this part of a design document? This is one from an actual professional sample. What about this is clear and concise? Like, what does the author do? So talk to your peers, try and figure out what exactly makes this easy to read or easy to look at. Okay, I'm curious about what about this is clear to you and concise and like easy to read? Anybody over here I haven't heard from? Yes, in the back. Here we go.
Right off of the bat, I can see that it's titled and bold-faced, and there's a number set up, so I'm guessing there's a table of contents somewhere in the front that helps you get right there. The white spaces basically segmentizes everything so that you have kind of a clear and concise, like, this is what this topic is about. Then you have the bullets, so that pretty much just tells you read here for this part.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about the white space. That is another thing that came up when you were looking at the code. The bolding, clearly a title, and the numbers in order, probably corresponding to a table of contents. What else makes this clear? We have another person anywhere? Really obvious things. I heard the bullet points. Do the bullet points help you? Why do they help?
You don't have to read an entire paragraph to find what you're looking for.
Yeah, it makes it kind of really scannable, right? Like, you can read the title and be like, oh, those are probably 4 important points. And you can see that, like, approach is divided into 4, like, right off the bat, which is a very intentional decision, right, by the author. Anybody else? What makes it easy or nice to look at? Like, you could get the information kind of really fast. Could be the most simple thing. Yeah, the indentation. So what do you mean? Like the indentation of the bullet points themselves?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool, yeah. No, it's neat that the bullet points are kind of in a line. And that, 2.1 and 2.2 sort of match, and it's really easy to see those exact main points. Okay, so the layout of this is important. So there are features of the layout. And do both of those sections, do both look the same, or they both kind of look different? What do you see? Like, if you compare these two sections, when you notice both of them, what do you see?
Well, the second section is a little bit more verbose because it's already starting to go into more detail.
Okay, so there's different amounts of writing in different sections. There's a little bit more writing in the second section. What about how they're similar? Do they look like they go in the same document? I'm seeing some nods, yes. Does that help you or no, or? Not much? I don't know, to me, like, and again, I'm reading this as a completely naive reader, right? Like, I do not know anything about design documents, and to me, this looks really friendly. Like, when I look at one section, I'm like, a section is oriented by a chunk of text, and then some bullet points. And the next section is also oriented by a chunk of text and some bullet points. So I, as the reader, am feeling kind of comfortable because each section is kind of visually matching the other sections. Okay. Let's now look at the actual text, the actual writing. So here's the zoomed in on 2.1. And in this one, I want to focus more on the words and the language. So you can focus on the visual layout too, but I'm interested in the words and the sentences and how why is this clear to you? Why is this easy to read? What features make it easy to read? So talk, again, with your partner. Spend a couple minutes talking about. And this is what I'm asking you to do is really hard. It's just like, well, it just is, right? But see if you can figure out exactly what is it that makes this really easily communicable, or this information communicable. Okay, I'm super interested in the words that make this work. I'm gonna pick groups out. Anybody, any word, what stuff while reading this? I'll summarize. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, it kind of just makes it very clear and like concise how you were saying that, like, it kind of just gives you an idea of what's going to happen.
It gives you an idea of what's going to happen. Which sentence does that? Like what actual, what is the part? Yeah, the first sentence tells you, so actually it tells you two things, right? It kind of tells you what's gonna, what the text immediately after, it tells you what the document was created for. So it tells you the purpose of the overall thing, but it also tells you what exactly is gonna come next. The document is created and extended in multiple phases over the course of the project. If you didn't have those bullet points afterwards, what do you think would come? You would be able to tell what would come after, right? You would be able to say, oh, okay, this author is now going to tell me about the multiple phases. That's a really, really, really sophisticated and cool technique, I think, in writing. I don't know, do you see any parallels in a written paragraph to this type of structure? Yeah, a paragraph often starts with a main idea and then goes into more detail. And we heard that a lot about coding. You start with broad ideas, then you go into more detail. That same thing is happening within this paragraph. And at the Writing Center, like I usually say, a good topic sentence really does a lot for a paragraph. You kind of summarize what the entire paragraph is about, then you go into detail. Cool.
Which is why in coding we define functions, and then the functions encapsulate detail. We define classes, and the classes encapsulate detail. So that when we're looking at it from a higher level, more abstract level, we don't have to worry about those details immediately. The function name tells us, or at least hints as what it does. The name of the class kind of tells us what it is, then if you want the detail, then you can start to go in there and look at those things.
Okay, so we've got one good feature is this paragraph in this writing, it tells us what it's going to do very explicitly, that first sentence. Anything else? What about the words like makes this easy to read? Anybody here? Yeah.
Kind of a pattern when it comes to the sentences, like it says during the requirement phase, during the system phase. It kind of follows a pattern for each one so you know what to expect.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of patterns here. I found that extremely helpful. Like multiple phases. Look, the requirements phase, the system design phase, the construction phase, the transition phase. That was really, again, as a naive reader, that was really useful for me. So repetition in writing, not always a bad thing, right? You don't want to repeat yourself too many times, but this, and I think, Vishnia, correct me if I'm wrong, parallelism, there's a writing term for it. It means like effectively using the same structure to to draw the reader's attention to the similarity. So not only are those titles similar, does anyone see more similarity in the descriptions? Group. Anybody else about the words? Yeah.
They all start off by saying like during which phase that it's talking about. So just expanding on like the italicized portion in the beginning.
Yeah, so not only the titles, but the actual structure of the sentences is parallel, right? During the this phase, this happens. During the this phase, this happens. So the sentences are not just like, okay, what do I need in this section? There are 4 phases. It's happening in Java. We're writing it for this. Like, this information is all grouped in a really specific way. And each time you make a new point, it like shows how it's similar to the previous point, which I think is a really, for me, again, I'm coming at this new, it really makes it easier to read. Any last comments on how? Yeah.
They're basically kind of not forced into an order, but they're put in an order that way you can understand one directly after each other. It's like reading an entire paragraph, but it's written in a bullet system, and it makes total sense.
Yeah. And you say it makes total sense, and that's, as a reader, you're feeling that, which is great, but I'm sure that the author did not, like, you know, sit down and be like, well, let's make the 4 bullet points this. Like, one thing I'd encourage you to do if I were, like, writing this paragraph, I would be like, okay, what's my approach? I would take 5 minutes and I would free write. So I would write without any grammatical anything. I would just get it all on a page, and then I would look at it and say, okay, where do I want the bullet points to be here? What is that overall sentence that is going to tell me, like, what this section is about? And then I would try and make this. But the first thing I do when I write is I have a lot of trouble writing because, like, I'm really scared of it because I want it to be perfect, and, like, I'm scared that I don't know what to think and all this. But, like, that's why I really like free writing, because I, like, think to myself, for the next 5 minutes, I'm not going to be scared. I'm just going to literally write anything that's in my head. And I know that that's not the final draft. So it, like, kind of makes it lower stakes for me. Okay, one more.
Good writing is good editing. I don't know who said that, but you know, if you just throw 10 sentences on the page, one of those sentences is bound to be good, right? Cut it down to that one, right? Go ahead and throw those 10 sentences on the page. And the last parallel that I want to bring in was remember those code samples. You had 10 lines that sorted the array, right? And which is fine, but then the ideal solution is to cut that down into one line. Just like in technical writing, if you can say something in 10 sentences, but then say the exact same thing in one sentence, you do the one sentence, right? You cut it all down into that one thing.
Okay, last one, real fast. What do you notice about the writing here? How is the presentation of this? Talk to your partner real fast. Why is the presentation of this? Where do you notice clarity and concision? Okay, what makes this one super clear? Anybody? Something real? Yeah.
We were saying, like, wherever you look on the page, your eyes will always end up at the same end spot, regardless of, like, if it's in the top right or the bottom left.
Sorry, can you say that
again? Like, wherever you start looking, your eyes will always end up at the same spot of, like, the SCR_household because of the directions of the arrows and the way it brings you through the graphic.
Cool. So you're noticing so is that because of the arrows that are doing that? Yeah. So the arrows are all leading your eye to the most kind of relevant information. And I didn't actually notice that, but all of them do have a CSR at the top. So I'm looking at all those titles and thinking, okay, that's the same. Anything else about this that's...
What about the writing?
Yeah, the actual writing.
How many words are there? How many sentences are there? Versus how much information is there. And again, remember, this is to a technical audience. This is a UML diagram. You may or may not have seen one yet, but the technical audience would know what this is. and would be able to read this.
Okay, so like you mentioned, the technical audience, it's very clear and concise, each individual model, like how they're ordered. You know, like for example, all these primary keys are at the very beginning, and they're all underlined, bolded, they're sectioned away from other types of stuff. And each method has its own individual name, so you know you can distinguish that. I don't know. I think it's pretty good that way.
You just mentioned that they were keys. Sorry, it's not a UML diagram, it's an ER diagram. I forgot which one she put up there.
What's interesting to me about this is that when I looked at this, I was like, what if this were a paragraph? Right? Like, what if somebody had written this? I mean, I might be able to read it at night before I went to sleep, and it'd help me sleep. But, like, it might be really difficult to translate this type of information into writing. Are there other parts of the design document or in your coding when you see, like, communication maybe not so useful through writing and maybe better represented through a diagram? Are there parts of the design document that you can envision that happening in? Like, which parts? Anybody?
Well, when you have a bunch of objects and classes that connect to each other in various ways, you can spend a lot of words describing how they connect to each other, or you can just show it with a diagram not dissimilar from this.
Yeah. What's the old saying? A picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a picture. It's worth probably 10,000 words if you actually had to translate this to a paragraph.
Yeah, so if you're writing and you're like, man, it's hard to organize this section because I want to show how it's connected to this thing, but also to this thing, you might consider. Yeah.
And also it's completely not useful. It's completely not useful for the reader if you describe it in words, because you will have to visualize it abstractly in your head, and like, try and describe that and then visualize it in your head. Good luck.
Yeah. That's also really cool what you just said. There's like a triple cognitive thing that needs to go on when you are going to write something like this in words. So the reader needs to first understand it and then make this diagram in their head of all these relationships. And you're right, you're cutting down that kind of work on the reader. Okay, so today in this presentation we looked at three main things. The first, we did a free write. And I know that feels weird, but it's that exercise is to show you that you can get words on a page, and then it's much, much easier to find where those bullet points should be, like how your text should flow, what that opening sentence should be, if you've got kind of like a bunch of sentences on a page. So free writing, really, really good as a first draft, maybe not one that you hand in, but like when you start down to writing and you're scared like me, and you're like, I can't do this. It really helps me get going. The second thing we looked at was reverse outlining of your code. So when you're writing code and you're like, how do I revise this? Stop, make a reverse outline and say like, oh, this part and this part look the same, or oh, I defined my terms up here but didn't use them till later. That act really, really helps with the revision process. And third, when you want to figure out why a document is good, you kind of look at the requirements for the assignment, pick a sample and ask yourself, okay, if clarity and concision are important when I'm a reader looking at these documents, how do those things jump off the page to me? So when you're writing your own, you're going to be like, okay, I can write first sentences that summarize this section. I can make bullet points. I can add diagrams. So you've got a bunch of things that you can now do in your drafts. Okay, so Vishnia and I think a lot about these things all the time, and it's super fun. And I love looking at different disciplines and noticing how the writing is different, and biology is different from English, is different from computer science. And there's a place you can go if you want to bring your drafts of your design documents in.
Yeah. So both Meredith and I work at the UNL's Writing Center. And is anyone familiar with the Writing Center? Has anyone visited the Writing Center before? Yes, I see a couple of people. Okay, that's wonderful. So we actually work with UNL students, and we offer one-on-one sessions with undergraduate and graduate consultants. And we are located in Andrews Hall, which is the English department building, and it is actually a minute away from here, right? So it's super close. And we also have evening hours from 5 to 7 in the Adele Learning Commons, a couple of satellite locations, both on Central Campus. So we have satellite locations in Gone Multicultural Center, the East Campus Union, and a brand new satellite location that is going to start working at the engineering building sometime next week or in 2 weeks' time. So make sure to check it out. So as far as the Writing Center in general, as I decided to include in the slide, we don't write or fix papers for you, but we are here to help you out with any type of writing that you're currently working on. So we can help you with your work for any class, not just English. So if you need to write a lab report, research paper, posters, we can help you out with those. We can also help you with writing that's not for class. So we can help you with your resumes, cover letters, personal statements, anything of that sort. I really enjoy working with students on their personal statements for grad school or for different scholarships. I'm an international student, and I did a study abroad back in the days, so I love working with students who are super excited to go and study abroad. And we are a free service. Basically, what you need to do is you need to visit this website, unl.mywconline.com, to schedule a 20 or 50-minute appointment online. You do need to set up your profile first, and then you can set up or schedule the appointment. And as far as the things that you need to bring when you come to the Writing Center, so you do need to bring the whatever piece of writing that you're working on. So you can bring hard copies. You can also bring your computers, but you actually have to be able to access the file, because what we typically do is we ask the students that are working with to read those papers out loud, or we read those papers for them, but we have to have the writing in front of us. Then typically we ask our students to bring us an assignment handout or a syllabus or anything that your professor provided for that specific assignment, so that we know what you're working on, what the end goals of the assignments are. And then we also advise students to bring any questions that they might have about that specific assignment. So I think that's, and any feedback that you have received, because for some classes, professors ask their students to write drafts, and then they actually return those drafts with the comments. So that's also something that we would like to see. We would love to work with you guys and help you with any type of writing that you're working on. So make sure to check the Writing Center's website. It's right on top. So unl.edu/writing. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for